in Lebanon.
You can see the eldest one always takes the lead. Can you all hear me at the back? No.
Just up closer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Up closer.
Yeah. First, I want to thank everybody for being here and for allowing us the opportunity to share the story of our immigration from Lebanon to Australia. We've been here now 50 years, and it feels like yesterday when we arrived in Port Melbourne. Judy, you asked me my recollection of Lebanon. You know, when we first came to Australia 50 years ago, many people we encountered had not heard of Lebanon, but they had heard of Gibran. And many times people would ask us how we coped in the desert, and what tent did we live in, and how did we travel by foot or on camels, and so on and so on. And for us it was a little bit of a shock, because we were born and grew up in Beirut at the time when Beirut and Lebanon were culminating in terms of culture, civilization, being the crossroad between West and East. And we came from quite a modest family in terms of economical means, but my father always lived beyond his means, because he wanted to bring us up in a home of culture, books, music. So he spent all his wages buying books, weekly subscription to very sophisticated magazines, sending us to piano lessons, ballet lessons, and borrowing on his wage to send us to a very prestigious Jesuit nun school. So we grew up in that sort of environment, so you can imagine the cultural shock we encountered when we first came to Australia. And my vivid memory is the fact that we lived sort of a privileged life, although we came from a modest mean home, in that we didn't have a car, we didn't have a telephone, we didn't have a maid like all my friends did, but we really thrived in a home of poetry and music and dance. And what I remember is that life in the city, where we would go to museums, we would go to what we called at school a movie club, where every movie would be analyzed, critically dissected, and that wouldn't be commercial movie, that would be like the movie houses you go in, and that was in 1965 I'm talking about. So I remember that vivid life in the city, but at the same time, in the holidays, we would go to the village where we came from the south, and I have vivid memory of these beautiful green fields near Sidon, which had bright poppies, red poppies, as well as wild cyclamens and amazing jasmines that I never forget the smell of. And we would go to the village where we would visit our auntie and my cousins. And what I remember vividly is that in the village, where we would go buy a car that my father would hire, no one had cars, and all the kids in the village will come around the car as if it was a real novelty, and we'll have this amazing welcome. And in the morning we'll go up to the fields and we'll pick up figs and grapes in baskets, and when it rained we would go and collect snails, which was my favorite meal. and then the special occasions where they would go and pick up hummus, which was the green hummus from the field, the chickpeas. And then in the morning they'll have all the wheat that they will grind into burghul, and they're amazing memories. So it was that dichotomy between city and countryside that I recall.
Hadia, that's amazing, and I think one of the things that reminds me very much of when you talk about your home, and I want to ask this question to Loubna, was about the music in your home, as well as your other recollections of you, of course, wherever that beautiful mosaic of recollections comes from.
Thank you, Judy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah.
I was very annoyed when I heard your question, Judy, because
That's on you.
because I don't have one vivid memory. I have a vivid memory for every time of the day, in the morning, or at 10 o'clock, or at lunchtime. I feel like I live in two spaces, basically. I live here and in Lebanon. Like when I wake up in the morning, in Lebanon, my most vivid memory would be listening to Fayrouz, you know, our beautiful singer, singing, "The sun is shining," you know, and the birds are singing. And hearing my grandma, the clicking of the spoon in the kettle while she makes coffee, and the smell of coffee. And the smell of the cigarette that she was rolling. She rolled her Turkish cigarettes long before they became cool here. And the season, every season, I have a very vivid memory of every season of winter and summer. So I think, you know, we live a very complex life as immigrants because we have to sort of accommodate the past and the present in the same space. So in a way I'm lucky, but in a way, coming from the Orient and waking up in the Occident, or in this case, you feel a bit disoriented until you sort of work out exactly where you are and where your memories.
If I could add on
I'm
that.
not
And I'm sure you will.
Hang on, who's running this?
No, when you said
I'm pushing for the youngest to get a word in, you
Can
know
I just
that.
make this point? Now, when you talk about Orient and Occident, it's interesting, Loubna, because the way I feel and continue to feel, and hopefully I'll get over it one day, you know when you are between two flags, you know, it's in the ocean, for example, and it's a safe place where you can swim or float or dive or surf. I feel that in Australia for the last 50 years, I'm always looking for that safe place between the two flags. And that safe place is the way we can adapt and feel part of this country while remaining true to ourselves and our root. And I'm continuing that search for that safe place.
Wow.
Can we get a clap?
Bit of encouragement. And Bouthaina, for you as the youngest in your family, you know, it was a different experience, wasn't it? Because you had these amazing women ahead of you. You had parents that were just remarkable. But for you, what was your recollections?
Because I left Lebanon when I was 7, a lot of my memories of Lebanon are really sensory. So I remember, for example, lying on my grandmother's chest and listening to the sound of her breathing. And she was a smoker. So the sound, it was a very cavernous sort of sound. I also remember the sounds of the morning in Lebanon and how they travelled. And they're quite different to the sounds in Australia, because Lebanon is surrounded by mountains along one side, and then the Mediterranean on the other side. So the sounds echo in a different way than what they do in Australia. They actually almost embrace you. Here the sounds sort of go out, and you get a sense of a large space, so it's a different geography, and therefore sound is different here. Yeah, a lot of other things, sitting on the steps in the garden, looking out at the mountains, yeah, things like that. Very sensory mostly.
Absolutely beautiful. And some of the images you're seeing are exactly some of those. I want to just take it a little bit, bring Gibran into it just a little bit here, because I know you're going to weave it in anyway. But where was your first sort of experience of Gibran?
I think my father used to read it in Arabic, But as far as my own meeting with Gibran, it was when I was in Australia. We had our bookshelves, and I didn't really have much English, but I had enough English to be able to read The Prophet and Sand and Foam and Broken Wings. And because it sort of created a space for me that I really related to, it's almost like, you can see it in the paintings of Gibran. It's a beautiful, mystical space, and I think that was my first connection with him. It was like a puzzle for me to understand what he spoke about.
And in fact, you did mention some words when we talked about this a little earlier, when you said, you know, Gibran's poetry was like a riddle at that age. Growing up in a household of books, and music created the fabric and the matrix. And there was an interesting piece of symbolism in that. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, sometimes you might not know as a child what influences your life. You might not be able to read the books, but the fact that you are surrounded by books, the fact that your family plays the piano, in a sense gets into the fabric of your being, and that is what you become as an adult. That's what I meant.
Well played, Loubna.
Well, I think, you know, Gibran is so much part of the normal conversation in Lebanon of our language. His sayings usually just crop in normally, you know, without quoting, oh, this is Gibran, but you just say them. But my father was particularly sort of against anything that had to do with status or image. And I think Gibran really sort of addressed that, in that, you know, just because, you know, you wear nice clothes, your morality is not what you appear to be just because of your clothes. So things like that, and especially to do with the clergy, which is something very sort of relevant now. But yeah, it's very hard to sort of pinpoint a time when Gibran appeared. I think he was just there, you know.
And Hadia, for you, you talked a lot about that beautiful quote, "Work is love made visible," of Gibran.
Yes, I mean, I love Gibran's work because he had some beautiful work in literary Arabic. You know, his poetry in Arabic is just uplifting, musical, just amazing. And then he had